all children go to hell. Bored and lonely, Robbie moped in his pale blue room. He had broken a vase out of spite, and his parents had banished him indefinitely to his train-shaped bed. There was to be no TV, no snacks. He was permitted to read, but books didn't interest him. Hours later, he still sat on his mattress, fist propped against his chin, staring at his chest of drawers and thinking about the world outside. Suddenly, his window flew open. Through it glided a monster of densely coiled pasta, chunky tomato sauce atop its head. Lips formed a doughy smile as the monster regarded Robbie with oversized meatball eyes. Standing before him, it seemed larger than the room. The boy was confused, but didn't feel threatened. The monster looked funny and smelled of SpaghettiOs, his favorite food since kindergarten. Nothing so silly and delicious could hurt him, he figured. After nearly a minute of silence, Robbie asked, "What are you?" A sonorous voice replied, "I'm the flying spaghetti monster." He then asked what it wanted. "To show my best friend a magic trick." It paused, cocked its head. "Are you my best friend, Robbie?" Words failed the boy, so the spaghetti monster said, "I know everything. Become my best friend, and I'll prove it." But Robbie already had a best friend. His name was Ben, and together they played ball, caught and killed bugs, and built forts of pillows and snow. It seemed wrong to abandon Ben for a creature he had just met, but he wanted, more than anything, to see magic on such an otherwise gray and boring day. "Yes," Robbie said finally, "you're my best friend. So rub me. See what I can do." Robbie sat there, staring. What it had said reminded him of the things sweaty, balding men told little boys in weird videos his parents had made him watch. Again, he thought of SpaghettiOs, but still trembled as he left the mattress and reached for the monster. Beneath his fingers, individual pasta strands felt electric and throbbed like veins. When he rubbed, the strands became motile, twisting around, spiraling into one another as the monster grew. Soon it was bigger than the house, the earth, yet expansion continued. Faced with noodles longer than river systems, the boy stopped rubbing. "Now enter me," the monster said. "It's warm and cozy inside." Robbie thought food should enter people, but then recalled gingerbread houses where storybook characters lived. Perhaps this was a similar arrangement. And who else in his school could say they'd been inside a spaghetti monster? "Will I see guts?" he asked sheepishly. It laughed as belly strands parted like a curtain. Climbing inside, Robbie found a cavernous hall of white. It was indeed warm and cozy, no guts to be seen. Ahead of him, runners of spaghetti stretched out, knitting together to form a crude hammock. Robbie first sat in it, but his eyelids grew heavy, and he decided to rest. His mind began to wander, so much so that Robbie forgot he had another home. On occasions, he saw himself outside the monster, but nothing beyond it seemed real. Dinner time with parents was a gray blur with gray people with fading faces. Whenever they spoke, they said nothing of interest. School was more of the same. Other times, a younger voice would call to him, ask him to come out and play, but Robbie couldn't give it a name. "You are ready," the monster said. "Now close your eyes." Robbie did, and images snaked out from behind his lids, forming scenes. He saw himself bow before a litany of golden idols, man on trees, crosses, and a massive black cube. He saw himself burn incense and lie prostrate on prayer mats, then confess his sins to dark men in dark rooms and count beads in a rosary, over and over until his fingers bled. Then he clutched a knife, long, curved, and glistening. Lifting it high, he let sunlight play on the blade before plunging it into the guts of a tied-down, struggling bull. A moment later, he slid a different knife across the throat of a G.I. Joe. 1,000 such scenes converged in his mind, meshing into a shaft of blinding white light. Bathed in it, Robbie could no longer think, no longer feel. He had become all things at once. No time and forever passed. Dimming, the light separated into component parts, returning the boy to consciousness as idols, prayer cloths, knives, and beads were absorbed into the monster to become pasta again. Suddenly, a booming voice, "You must leave me now." "But I just got here," Robbie said, disappointed. "Can I stay longer?" "No one can remain inside me forever, but don't be glum. I have another trick to show you." Robbie perked at the promise. The first had been much better than anything on TV, so he could only imagine how much greater a second trick might be. Strands parted for him. He saw light, got up, and stepped towards it, into a world where his room had become a soggy, decaying ruin. Windows had shattered, the ceiling sagged, the brown-green mold grew wild on the carpet. Paper had dried, turned black, and peeled from the walls. It littered the floor like dirty snow. Robbie considered calling down to his parents, but knew they weren't there. Though the place was nothing if not vacant, it didn't concern him. His best friend had a new trick to show. Do it, Robbie said impatiently, and was surprised by the depth of his voice. I will, if you do one last thing for me. The strands of the monster's lips formed another, wider smile. Make me your only friend. Robbie opened his mouth, but closed it quickly. Perhaps it was best to have friends not made of pasta, sauce, and bulbous mouths of meat. Friends who didn't want him all to themselves. He thought hard, recalled a forgotten name, and felt a sudden twinge of regret. But Ben has been gone for a while now, the monster said. He's in a better place. He is? You could go and make new friends, of course. But why bother? I'm already here, aren't I? Robbie nodded. So do as I ask, and I'll show you a trick. The offer was too tempting to refuse. You're my only friend, Robbie said, and meant it. The monster beckoned. Then step up, rub me again. Robbie obeyed, and the walls of his house collapsed and turned to dust. Rotting beneath him, floorboards buckled before giving way. But he didn't fall into the basement. His one and only friend supported him, even as he performed the same trick in reverse, becoming smaller than Robbie, then smaller than an infant. In seconds, the monster fit neatly in the boy's cupped palm. Strands no longer pulsed. Sheer electricity felt like mere static. Robbie rubbed with a single finger now, rubbed until the monster resembled an ant. Then he stopped, fearful that he might crush such a tiny and seemingly delicate thing. Don't worry, Robbie, it soothed in a still, small voice. Nothing can harm or take from me. My essence is eternal. Robbie didn't know all the words, but he understood the gist. So he continued until it seemed that he held only air. The trick, he realized, had actually been a disappearing act. That was great, he said. Now show me another. From the emptiness in his palm, there came no reply. Are you there, he continued. Silence deepened, swallowing background noise. He glanced around, but saw that direction itself had failed him. There was no longer up or down, left or right. He had only his body, and a void as eternal as the monster had once seemed. Immediately he felt lost and alone, trapped and deceived. Dread took hold, then panic and all-consuming horror. Aimlessly he flailed. But in the time that was no time, even terror died. Left with his thoughts, he studied the dark hairs and dry cracks of his withered hands. He wondered if his monster had been wrong, if he'd crushed it, if it was dead, or if it had even existed at all. Vision fading, he yearned for all the things he left behind, just for the promise of a little magic on a dull, boring day. Mom, Dad, Ben, he called, voice breaking, but they were nothing. And, in an instant, Robbie was nothing too.